"I will not be your bride," I snarled, the words scraping raw from my throat. I spat at his boots, the only rebellion left to me, with silver chains burning into my wrists. He stared down at me like I was something broken, something beneath notice, and for a heartbeat I thought he might strike me dead where I knelt. His guards moved first. 2 massive wolves in black leather, their hands reaching for my arms. But I twisted away and threw my weight into the closest one, shoving him back a step. They dragged me here 3 days ago, and I wasn't about to make their job easy now. I was in the temple square when I heard it. The moon's whisper. Every 5 years the Alpha King chose an Omega bride through the ancient ceremony, and each time the chosen one was never seen again. I never thought I'd be called. He needed fertile Omegas, strong bloodlines. Women who could bear heirs and strengthen the pack. So when the seer's voice rang out across the square, I didn't even look up until the name hit my ears like a fist. Sandra Whisper. The world tilted. People turned, their faces a blur of shock and confusion. Whispers rose like smoke. Her. But she's barren. Why would the moon choose a broken Omega? Poor thing. She won't last a week. I cursed under my breath and tried to run, but the king's guards were already closing in. Their hands were iron, their grip unbreakable. I fought anyway. Kicked, clawed, bit down hard enough to taste blood. It didn't matter. They threw me into the reinforced carriage like I was nothing, slamming the door before I could catch my breath. The wheels started rolling, and through the small barred window, I watched the temple square disappear. The market stalls, the healer's cottage, the faces I'd never see again. Everything I'd ever known gone. The road stretched on forever. The carriage rattled like bones over stone, kicking up clouds of dust that clung to my throat. My wrists burned where the silver bit into skin, but I barely felt it anymore. I was too busy trying not to think. But silence has a way of forcing thoughts on you. Alpha King Henry Nightclaw was a nightmare made flesh, a monster who ruled through fear and blood. He took Omega brides and they vanished like smoke. Some said he killed them in dark rituals. Others whispered he drained their life force to feed his power. No one knew for certain, but everyone agreed on one thing. No one ever came back. I used to think those were just stories, the kind people told to make horror sound like legend. But sitting in that carriage, wrists bound and future stolen, I knew better. He was real and I was next. The thought made my stomach twist with something darker than fear. He preferred young Omegas, they said. 18 summers, sometimes barely grown. Women in their prime, fertile and strong. I was 24 summers, past the age he usually wanted, past the age anyone wanted. Which meant this wasn't selection. It was punishment. That's when it hit me. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they hadn't meant me at all. They'd said Sandra Whisper. But what if they'd meant Sarah Whisper, my cousin? She was younger, sweeter, still whole where I was broken. She still believed in kindness, in hope, in all the pretty lies that made life bearable. I used to tease her for it, for that softness that never hardened no matter how cruel the world got. Now thinking of her face, I prayed she'd never lose it. Most people couldn't even tell us apart. We had the same golden hair, the same sharp cheekbones, the same stubborn way of standing like we were daring the world to push us. She was the reflection I used to be. One untouched by shame and isolation. If this was a mistake, then it was mine to fix. If they wanted a whisper girl, they could have me, not her. I'd already lived through years of being called worthless, of being treated like I was less than nothing because my body couldn't do what Omega bodies were supposed to do. But Sarah deserved better. She deserved the life I'd never have. I leaned back against the carriage wall and closed my eyes, letting the ache settle deep in my chest. I'd play along. I'd act scared when they wanted fear. I'd nod and lower my eyes when they demanded submission. I'd do whatever it took to survive long enough to find a way out. And when I did, when I finally looked that monster in the eye, I'd end him. For the Omegas who never came home. For the families who never stopped mourning. For my cousin who still believed there was light in this cursed world. Someone had to destroy the darkness that wore a crown. And if no one else would, then I'd do it myself. The carriage jerked to a stop so suddenly my head cracked against the wall behind me. The horses snorted and stamped, their hooves echoing against stone. When the door creaked open, cold air rushed in, sharp and metallic. It smelled like winter and blood, like something ancient that refused to die. Out, one of the guards growled. I stepped down, unsteady, my legs stiff from days of being caged. The sight that greeted me stole what little breath I had left. Nightclaw Fortress. It rose from the mountain like something carved from pure nightmare. All black stone and jagged towers that clawed at the sky. A ravine split the earth in front of it, spanned by a bridge so narrow it looked like one wrong step would send you plunging into darkness forever. Torches lined the walls, their flames fighting against the wind and losing. At the highest tower, the Alpha's banner whipped violently. A silver wolf on a field of black, jaws open in an eternal howl. The guards shoved me forward across the bridge. My boots slipped on wet stone and I caught myself on the railing. Below, the gorge roared, endless and hungry. "Move," one of them snapped. I did, but I made sure to glare at every stone of that fortress like my hatred alone could bring it crashing down. When we reached the gates, they groaned open without anyone touching them. The sound rumbled through my bones. The air on the other side felt heavier, colder, like the world itself held its breath here. Inside was a hall lined with torches and black banners. The wolf symbol stared down from every wall, watching, judging. The guards marched me through corridors that all looked the same until we reached massive iron doors carved with claw marks deep enough to be warnings. They opened and there he was. The Alpha King. Henry Nightclaw sat on a throne that looked carved from the same black stone as his fortress. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable. I had expected a brute, a monster with blood on his teeth. Instead he was composed, controlled. Every line of him spoke of power held in check like a storm waiting to break. His armor caught the torchlight like water under moonlight. Dark hair fell past his shoulders and his eyes, amber, burning, ancient, locked onto mine. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. Then I remembered who he was. What he'd done. And who I was never going to be. "I will not be your bride," I spat, the words burning my throat. He didn't even flinch. The guards tensed, hands moving to their weapons, but he lifted one hand and they froze like statues. His voice when it came was calm. Too calm. "You already are." They dragged me through corridors that twisted like the inside of a shell until we reached the east wing. The guards threw open a set of carved doors and shoved me inside before I could get my bearings. The lock clicked behind me, final as a grave closing. I stood there, breathing hard, expecting a cell. Stone walls, maybe chains bolted to the floor. Instead I found luxury that made my skin crawl. Silk sheets in deep crimson draped over a bed large enough for three. Golden bars covered the windows, pretty cages that let in light but never freedom. Tapestries lined the walls, all depicting wolves under the moon, hunting, killing, claiming. This wasn't a prison. It was a tomb dressed up as a bedroom. I was still staring when the door opened again. An elderly she-wolf entered, her gray hair pulled back in a severe knot. She carried a tray of food, her hands steady despite her age, her eyes carefully blank. "I'm Mara," she said quietly, setting the tray on a small table. "I'll be attending to you." "Attending to me?" I crossed my arms. "You mean making sure I don't escape?" She didn't answer, just turned to leave. "Wait." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "This room. The East Wing. How many others have been here?" Her hands trembled just slightly. "All of them." "And where are they now?" Mara's face went pale as death. She shook her head and moved toward the door. "Tell me what happened to them," I demanded, my voice rising. "Did he kill them? Did he?" She fled before I could finish, the door slamming shut behind her. The lock clicked again and I was alone with my questions and the ghost of every Omega who'd slept in that bed before me. I didn't touch the food. I didn't sleep. I spent the night testing every window, every floorboard, searching for a way out that didn't exist. When dawn broke gray and cold through the golden bars, the guards came for me again. They led me through different corridors, this time higher up in the fortress where the air felt heavier, more charged. We stopped at a door carved with the wolf symbol, and one of the guards knocked twice before pushing it open. "The king wants you at breakfast," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I stepped inside expecting a throne room or worse, a bedroom. Instead I found something that looked almost normal. A private chamber with a table set for two, papers scattered across a desk in the corner, maps pinned to the walls showing territories I didn't recognize. And Henry Nightclaw, standing at the window with his back to me, shoulders tight with exhaustion I hadn't seen the night before. He dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand. The door closed and we were alone. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he turned and I saw the dark circles under his eyes, the way his jaw was clenched like he was holding back words that would destroy him if he let them out. He crossed to me in 3 long strides and knelt. Before I could pull away, his hands were on my wrists, working the silver chains loose. His touch was careful, almost gentle, completely at odds with the monster I'd built him up to be. The chains fell away with a metallic clatter. "The realm is fracturing," he said, his voice low and rough. He stood, towering over me but somehow not threatening. "I need you to trust me." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Trust the monster who murders Omegas? Trust the king who takes brides and makes them disappear?" His jaw tightened. "I do what I must to keep thousands alive. And the brides?" I pressed, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "What about them? What happens to the Omegas you steal?" His amber eyes met mine, and for just a second I saw something that looked like grief. "The realm demands it," he said finally. "I am only the shield. They came for me at nightfall when the moon hung fat and red in the sky like a wound that wouldn't heal. No chains this time, just 2 silent guards who led me down into the belly of the fortress where the air grew cold enough to see my breath. The ancient temple waited at the bottom of those endless stairs, carved from the mountain itself. Blood-red moonlight poured through a crystalline ceiling, painting everything the color of fresh spilled life. Symbols covered the walls, old as time, writhing in the crimson glow like they were alive. Henry stood at the center of the chamber, already waiting. He'd changed into ceremonial robes, black as midnight, and his face was carved from stone. No emotion. No mercy. Just inevitability. Between us stood Mordain, the pack seer. He was ancient, this wolf, his eyes milky white with blindness, his hands trembling as he raised them toward the blood moon. When he spoke, his voice echoed off the stone like a funeral bell. "The blood moon rises. The debt must be paid." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt back up those stairs and never stop running. But the guards stood at the only exit, and Henry's eyes found mine across the chamber. There was something in his gaze that pinned me in place. Not threat. Something worse. Resignation. Mordain shuffled forward and seized my wrist with surprising strength. He bound it to Henry's with blessed cord that burned cold against my skin, tying us together with knots that felt older than the mountain itself. "Blood to blood," the seer chanted, producing a ceremonial blade that gleamed red in the moonlight. He cut Henry's palm first. The Alpha King didn't flinch, didn't make a sound as blood welled up dark and thick. Then the blade turned to me. I tried to pull away, but the cord held fast, and when the blade bit into my palm, I gasped at the sharp, bright pain. Mordain pressed our bleeding hands together over a silver chalice, and I felt Henry's blood mix with mine, hot and living. The old wolf's voice rose higher, filling the temple with words in a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. "Blood to blood, soul to soul, until the debt is paid." The chalice began to glow. Silver blue light erupted from where our palms met, spreading up our arms like liquid fire. I tried to jerk away, but it was too late. The light seared into my wrist, burning a mark into my skin, a crescent moon, glowing and perfect. The same mark appeared on Henry's wrist. And then his emotions slammed into me like a tidal wave. Crushing guilt that threatened to drown me. Exhaustion so ancient and deep I couldn't find the bottom of it. And underneath it all, desperate hope, fragile as spider silk, that somehow this time would be different. I gasped, stumbling, but his hand tightened around mine, steadying me even as I felt everything he'd ever felt crashing through my head. The connection terrified me more than anything else in this cursed place. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a chain that bound us together in ways I couldn't understand. When Mordain finally released us, I ran. Back up the stairs, through the corridors, anywhere to escape the feeling of Henry's soul pressed against mine. The guards let me go. They knew I had nowhere to run. That night I couldn't sleep. The mark on my wrist pulsed like a second heartbeat, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt his guilt pressing down on me. So I did what I'd planned from the beginning. I slipped out of my room when the guards changed shifts and found the healer's chambers. The lock was simple, the supplies easier to find. Wolfsbane, dried and deadly, hidden in a leather pouch. I took enough to stop a heart and tucked it into my sleeve. At dinner, I sat across from Henry in that same private chamber. He barely looked at me, his attention fixed on the reports spread across his desk. His wine sat untouched on the table between us, dark as blood in the candlelight. I waited until he turned to study a map, then crushed the wolfsbane between my fingers and let it fall into his goblet. It dissolved without a trace. All I had to do was wait for him to drink. I was counting the seconds when the door burst open. Commander Thorne, Henry's head of guard, strode in with panic written across his scarred face. "By King, the southern border. Rabid wolves, coordinated attack. 3 packs worth at least. They're tearing through the settlements." Henry was on his feet before Thorne finished speaking. He grabbed his weapons from the wall, already moving toward the door. He never touched the wine. And I sat there watching him disappear into the night to save people who feared him, the poisoned Gobel. Dawn broke gray and cold and I was still awake, staring at the poisoned wine I'd hidden under my bed like evidence of a crime not yet discovered. The crescent mark on my wrist pulsed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of the bond one hadn't asked for. I heard the commotion before I saw him. Shouting in the courtyard below, the thunder of hooves, voices raised in panic and relief. I moved to the window, pressing against the golden bars to see. Henry Nightclaw rode through the gates covered in blood. It streaked his face, soaked his clothing, painted him in violence. But cradled in his arms was a child, an Omega girl no more than 6 summers old, her throat torn open and bleeding. I watched, frozen, as he dismounted without letting go of her. The child was dying. I could see it from here, the way her small body hung limp, the blood that wouldn't stop flowing. Henry knelt in the courtyard dirt and laid his hands over her throat. Silver light erupted from his palms, brighter than the dawn, flowing into the wound like liquid starlight. The child's body arched and then the torn flesh began to knit itself together. Skin over muscle, blood vessels reconnecting, until there was nothing left but smooth, unmarked skin and a child gasping her first full breath. The healers rushed forward to take her, but Henry stayed on his knees in the blood-soaked dirt. His head bowed like the weight of what he'd just done was too much to carry. That's when I felt it through the bond. Not triumph. Not pride. Just bone-deep exhaustion and the crushing weight of another life saved. Another debt added to the thousands he already carried. I stepped back from the window, my certainty cracking like ice under pressure. He came for me an hour later. The door opened and there he stood, still covered in dried blood, holding the wine goblet I'd poisoned. My heart stopped. "Did you think I couldn't smell it?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it worse somehow. I lifted my chin, refusing to show fear. I expected nothing less from a monster. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. No guards. Just us and the poisoned cup between us. He should have called for my execution. Should have shown me the same mercy he'd shown countless Omegas before me. Instead he asked, "Why do you hate me so much you'd throw your life away?" The question broke something in me. You steal Omegas and murder them. You take them from their families and they vanish like smoke. You're a monster and everyone knows it and no one can stop you. His mask cracked. For the first time since I'd met him, the Alpha King looked human. Broken. "They died because of me," he admitted, his voice rough. "But not in the way you think. Each one volunteered for something greater." Volunteered. I laughed, bitter and sharp. To die. To save the realm. He set down the goblet and held out his hand. "Come with me." I should have refused. Should have stayed in my cage and waited for execution. But something in his eyes made me follow. He led me through the fortress to a garden I hadn't known existed. Standing stones filled the space, hundreds of them, each carved with names and dates. The memorial garden. Henry walked among them like a man visiting graves, his fingers trailing over the carved letters with reverence that made my throat tight. He stopped at one stone, his hand resting on it gently. Elena Bright Moon. She loved gardening. She used to sing while she worked. He moved to another. Marcus Shadowpaw. He wrote poetry. Terrible poetry, but he loved it anyway. His voice cracked. I remember all of them. Every name. Every face. Every dream they gave up. A sound caught my attention. A wounded wolf pup limping between the stones, its leg twisted wrong. Henry knelt without hesitation, that silver light flowing from his palms again, and the pup's leg straightened, healed, whole. When he looked up at me, his amber eyes held centuries of grief. "I am not the monster you think I am, but I am the monster this realm made me." And standing there among the names of the dead, watching him cradle a healed wolf pup with blood still drying on his hands, I felt my certainty fracture completely. The messenger arrived 3 days after the memorial garden, bursting into Henry's chambers where I sat picking at breakfast I couldn't taste. A young wolf, breathless and wild-eyed, clutching a scroll like it might explode. I king the ceremony records. There's a discrepancy. Henry took the scroll, his jaw tightening as he read. When he looked up, his amber eyes found mine with something that looked like inevitability. What discrepancy? I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. The messenger swallowed hard. The moon's whisper called Sandra Whisper, age 24, marked Barren by the healers. Not Sarah Whisper. The ceremony was meant for you all along. The room tilted. I gripped the table edge until my knuckles went white. That's impossible. Why would the moon choose me? I'm worthless. I can't give heirs, can't strengthen bloodlines, can't. Exactly, Henry said quietly. He dismissed the messenger with a wave and we were alone again. I knew from the moment you arrived. You knew. Rage flooded through me, hot and sharp. You knew it wasn't a mistake and you let me believe. I let you believe what you needed to believe until you were ready to hear the truth. He stood, moving to the window like he couldn't bear to look at me. The Omega brides, Sandra. They weren't murdered. I saw the memorial garden. I know they're dead. They were sacrificed. His voice was flat, empty. To contain the hollow. The name made something cold slither down my spine. What's the hollow? Henry turned and in his eyes I saw centuries of weight. An ancient corruption. Born when Alpha Vowrich's true mate was murdered by rival packs 300 years ago. In his grief and rage, Vowrich called on forbidden magic to create vengeance. A curse that would devour his enemies. But the hollow spread beyond his control, consuming guilty and innocent alike. It feeds on life itself, turning wolves rabid, driving whole packs to madness and death. I thought of the rabid wolves that had attacked the southern border. The coordinated violence that shouldn't have been possible. The attacks. Are the hollow waking? The ancient alphas had to bind Vowrich's curse using the only force strong enough to contain corruption. Omega life force. The creative energy that runs through your kind. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Every 5 years, a new bride must be given to renew the binding. Their life force feeds the spell that keeps the hollow chained. My mouth went dry. So you do kill them. The hollow kills them. I just deliver them to it. The grief in his voice was so raw it hurt to hear. I am the shield, Sandra. I bear the burden so thousands can live. Then why am I still alive? The question came out broken. If the hollow feeds on Omega life force, why hasn't it consumed me? Henry's expression shifted to something almost like hope. Because you're barren. The seer believes your condition confused the hollow. It couldn't consume what wasn't there. You're the first Omega to survive beyond the bonding ceremony. I looked down at the crescent mark on my wrist, glowing faintly in the morning light. So I'm useless even to a curse. No. He knelt before me, bringing us eye to eye. You're the opposite of useless. The seer's ancient texts mention something called the empty vessel. A rare Omega born without the ability to create life, but with the ability to hold and purify corruption itself. Not breeding stock, Sandra. A weapon. The words hit me like a physical blow. My whole life I'd been called broken, worthless, a failed Omega. And now this monster of a king was telling me I was born for something greater than bearing children. You're saying I was made to fight this hollow? I'm saying you might be the only one who can destroy it. His hand covered mine, warm and solid. The question is whether you're willing to try. I stared at him, this alpha king who carried the names of the dead carved into his soul. Who healed children and remembered poets, who bore an impossible burden alone. Tell me everything, I said. And then we end this curse together. Henry led me deeper into the mountain than I'd ever gone, past the Blood Moon Temple, down stairs that felt like they descended into the earth's bones. Torches lined the walls, but their light seemed swallowed by the darkness pressing in from all sides. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of ancient stone and something else. Something wrong. Where are we going? My voice echoed strangely, like the mountain was listening. To where it all began. His hand found mine in the darkness and I didn't pull away. The bond mark on my wrist pulsed warm against his skin. You need to understand what we're fighting. The stairs ended at a massive door carved from black stone. Symbols covered every inch of it, writhing in the torchlight like living things. Henry pressed his palm against the center and the door groaned open, releasing air that hadn't moved in decades. The temple beyond stole my breath. It was enormous, carved from the mountain's heart itself. Every surface, walls, ceiling, floor, was covered in intricate carvings. Wolves locked in battle. A male wolf standing over a fallen female, his head thrown back in a howl of such anguish I could almost hear it. And then the darkness spreading from him like ink in water, consuming everything it touched. Alpha vow rich, Henry said quietly, stopping before the largest carving. 3 centuries ago rival packs murdered his true mate. They tore her apart and left her for him to find. I stared at the carved female wolf, her body broken, her mate's grief etched into stone for eternity. In his rage and grief, Vow-Rich called upon forbidden magic. He wanted vengeance. He wanted his enemies to suffer as he suffered. Henry moved to the next panel where the darkness spread like a plague. He created the Hollow, an immortal curse meant to devour those who'd wronged him. But corruption doesn't discriminate. It spread beyond his control, consuming guilty and innocent alike, turning wolves rabid, driving entire packs to madness. The carvings showed wolves tearing into each other, packs destroying themselves, the realm falling into chaos. The ancient alphas had no choice. They couldn't destroy the Hollow. Vow-Rich had made it immortal. So they did the only thing they could. Henry led me to the center of the temple, where massive chains rose from the floor and disappeared into the ceiling. Each link was carved with names. Hundreds of them. Thousands. I stepped closer, my fingers trailing over the carved letters. Elena Brightmoon. Marcus Shadowpaw. Names I recognized from the memorial garden and hundreds more I didn't. Omega Life Force, Henry said, his voice rough. The creative energy that runs through your kind is the only thing strong enough to contain corruption. They chained Vow-Rich's spirit and the Hollow together, using Omega Lives as the binding prison. Each link was a life. Each name a sacrifice. The weight of it pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. The seer believes the Hollow can be destroyed, Henry continued, moving to stand beside me. If the Alpha King and an empty vessel Omega forge a true mate bond willingly, through love not duty, the purifying fire of a genuine bond could consume the corruption permanently. I looked at him, this king who'd carried centuries of death on his shoulders. Love. Not the bond we have now. That was forced, ceremonial. It would take something real. Something chosen. His amber eyes met mine. Something I have no right to ask for. I stared at the chains, understanding finally the impossible weight he'd carried alone. How many have tried before? His jaw tightened. 7 Alpha Kings over 3 centuries. All failed. All lost their Omegas to the Hollow. Why? Because duty isn't enough. Fear isn't enough. The bond has to be forged in genuine love. And how do you love someone when you know loving them might be what kills them? His voice cracked. How do I ask you to love me when it might mean watching you die like all the others? I turned to face him fully, this broken king standing among the names of the dead. The bond mark on my wrist glowed brighter, and I felt his fear, his hope, his desperate need to end this curse, and his terror of losing another Omega to it. Then we'd better make sure I don't die, I said. And in the heart of the mountain, surrounded by the weight of 3 centuries of sacrifice, something shifted between us. Not love. Not yet. But the fragile beginning of something that might become it. The storms came first. Not natural storms, but violent things that tore across the territories like the sky itself was screaming. Lightning struck without thunder. Rain fell black as ink. And everywhere the storms touched, madness followed. I stood at the window of Henry's chambers, watching the dark clouds roil and twist. 3 days since we'd descended into the mountain's heart. 3 days since I'd understood the weight he carried. 3 days since the realm had started dying. Eastern border just fell. Commander Thorne's voice cut through the room like a blade. He spread another map across Henry's desk, marked with red. Too much red. Rabid wolves, coordinated attacks. They're not hunting for food anymore. They're killing for the sake of it. Henry's jaw tightened. How many packs? 7 confirmed. More suspected. Thorne's scarred face was grim. And it's not just the rabid ones. Reports coming in of pack members turning on each other. Alphas attacking their own wolves. Omegas abandoning their young. The madness is spreading faster than we can contain it. Another messenger burst through the door, breathless. Alpha Greyfong sends word. His territory is overrun. He's begging for reinforcements. Tell him we have none to send. Henry's voice was hollow. Every pack is fighting the same battle. The messenger fled, and in the silence that followed, I felt it through the bond, Henry's crushing helplessness, his certainty that he was watching everything fall apart and couldn't stop it. The door opened again, but this time it was Mordain, the blind seer, leaning heavily on his staff. His milky eyes turned toward me like he could see straight through flesh to bone. The binding is failing, he said without preamble. The empty vessel has starved the hollow. It cannot feed on what she is, so it wakes fully, desperate and dangerous. Can we reinforce the chains? Henry demanded. There is nothing left to reinforce with. The hollow breaks free because she lives and it cannot consume her. Mordain's voice was ancient, tired. You have two choices, Alpha King. Give her to the hollow now and buy the realm another 5 years of dying slowly. Or attempt the ritual and risk losing everything. Henry's hand slammed down on the desk. Those aren't choices. They're the only choices we have left. When Mordain left, Henry stood at the window, his back to me, shoulders tight with the weight of 3 centuries pressing down. Outside, the black rain fell harder, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled with voices that didn't sound sane anymore. The only way to end it, he said finally, his voice breaking, is if you willingly use our bond to channel purifying power into the ritual that could consume the hollow. But Sandra, if we fail, if the bond isn't strong enough, if we can't generate the purifying fire, the hollow will devour your soul and break free forever. The realm won't just fall. It will become the hollow. I moved to stand beside him, looking out at the dying world. So we don't fail. 7 Alpha Kings have tried. 7 Omegas have died. He turned to face me, and in his amber eyes I saw raw fear. I can't ask you to die for a realm that has treated you as worthless your entire life. Something in my chest cracked open. I saw him clearly for the first time, not the monster I'd built him up to be, but a protector bearing centuries of grief and guilt. A king who remembered the names of poets and gardeners. Who healed children and wolf pups with hands that should have been used for violence. Who stood vigil over a realm that feared him while he carried their survival on his shoulders alone. I reached up and cupped his face, feeling the bond mark pulse warm between us. You've been the shield for 300 years, I said softly. Protecting everyone while bearing all the weight alone. But you're not alone anymore. His hand covered mine, and I felt his hope and terror crash through the bond like a wave. Let me be the sword, I whispered. Let me be the one who ends this. His forehead dropped to mine, and in that moment, surrounded by the sound of the realm tearing itself apart, something shifted between us. Not just the bond. Not just understanding. Something real and fragile and dangerous. Something that felt like the beginning of love. Together, he breathed. We face it together. Outside, lightning split the black sky, and the hollow hauled its hunger into the storm. Midnight found us in the ancient temple, surrounded by witnesses who'd traveled through dying territories to be here. Pack members from across the realm filled the chamber, their faces painted in blood-red moonlight streaming through the crystalline ceiling. I spotted Sarah in the crowd, my cousin's tear-stained face a mirror of the girl I used to be. Henry stood beside me at the center of the carved chains, his hand warm in mine. The bond mark on my wrist blazed like a star. Mordain shuffled forward, his blind eyes somehow seeing everything. He held the ceremonial blade, older than memory, its edge sharp enough to split moonlight. The blood moon rises. The debt ends tonight. His voice echoed off stone that had witnessed 3 centuries of sacrifice. One way or another. He seized my hand first, cutting deep across my palm. The pain was bright and immediate, blood welling dark. Then Henry's hand, the blade biting through his flesh without hesitation. Mordain pressed our bleeding palms together over the chains carved with the names of the dead. Blood to blood, soul to soul, he chanted. Speak your truths and let the bond decide if you are worthy. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Henry's grip tightened on mine. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the temple. I have carried the names of 43 Omegas carved into my soul. Elena, who loved gardening. Marcus, who wrote terrible poetry. Lyra, who sang. Every one of them volunteered to save a realm that treated them as less than nothing, and I delivered them to death. His voice cracked. I have lived 300 years bearing that guilt, that weight, that impossible burden. And then you came, fierce and defiant and unbreakable. You were supposed to be another sacrifice. Another name on my skin. But instead you gave me hope I had no right to feel. Sandra whisper, I love you. Not because the bond demands it, but because you taught me what it means to fight when everyone tells you you're worthless. Tears burned my eyes. The bond mark flared silver blue, and I felt his love crash through me like a wave, genuine and terrifying and real. Pie turn, I whispered. I looked out at the witnesses, at Sarah's face, at the chains covered in names. I was called Barren at 16 summers. The healers said I was broken, worthless, a failed Omega who would never fulfill her purpose. I believed them. I hated myself for what I couldn't be. My voice grew stronger. But I was never broken. I was born for this. Not to create life but to end death. Not to bear children but to save them. My worth was never defined by what I lacked. Henry Nightclaw, I love you because you see me, not as broken but as whole. Because you carry impossible weight and still find room to heal wolf pups and remember poets. Because you're not the monster they say you are. You're the shield. And I choose to be your sword. The moment the words left my lips, the temple floor cracked open. The hollow erupted from beneath us. A massive writhing darkness that filled the chamber like ink in water. Faces formed in the corruption, thousands of them, the tortured spirits of every Omega it had consumed over 3 centuries. Their mouths opened in silent screams. It struck at me like a serpent, seeking my soul, my life force, anything it could devour. But when it touched me it found nothing. No fertility to consume. No creative energy to feed on. Just emptiness. And emptiness cannot be consumed. I opened myself completely to the mate bond, feeling Henry's ancient alpha power surge into me. Silver light erupted from our joined hands, spreading up our arms, consuming us both. His strength and my purifying gift merged, 2 halves of something that had been broken for centuries finally made whole. Together we became fire. All my rage at being called worthless, all my fierce protective love for Sarah and every Omega who died in this cursed place, all my newfound understanding that I was exactly who I was meant to be, it poured through the bond and ignited. The hollow shrieked, a sound that should have shattered stone. It writhed and struck, desperate, but the purifying fire consumed it like paper. Centuries of corruption burned away in silver flame until there was nothing left but light. The chains shattered. The carved names glowed bright, and from them rose spirits, translucent, beautiful, finally free. Their whispers filled the temple, gratitude and relief and peace. And then silence. The hollow was gone. The curse was broken. And I stood in Henry's arms, both of us glowing like stars, alive and whole and transformed. 3 weeks after the ritual I woke to sunlight. Real sunlight, warm and golden, pouring through windows that no longer needed bars. The storms had ceased the moment the hollow died, and with them the madness that had gripped the realm for centuries. Henry was already awake, standing at the window overlooking the memorial garden. I joined him and together we watched the miracle that bloomed below. Night flowers covered every inch of the garden, their petals glowing soft silver in the morning light. They shouldn't have been able to grow in daylight, but the freed Omega spirits had blessed the land, and now beauty grew where only grief had lived before. The Eastern Territories report no rabid wolf attacks in 2 weeks, Henry said quietly, his arm coming around my waist. Pack members who turned on each other are asking forgiveness. The madness is lifting like fog under sun. I leaned into him, feeling the bond mark pulse warm against my skin. Peace. For the first time in 300 years. He pressed a kiss to my temple. Because of you. Because of us, I corrected. The week before, Henry had stood before the Council of Alphas and dismantled every law that had treated Omegas as property, as breeding stock, as acceptable sacrifices. Full citizenship. Rights and protections. The freedom to choose their own paths. Some alphas had protested, clinging to the old ways. Henry had made it clear those alphas could adapt or abdicate. The realm was changing one law at a time. Now we stood in the great courtyard of Nightclaw Fortress, surrounded by thousands. Wolves from every territory had traveled to witness this moment, the formal presentation of the new queen. The crowd stretched as far as I could see, faces painted in hope and curiosity and something that looked like awe. Sarah stood in the front row, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped over her heart. My cousin. My mirror. The girl I'd thought I was protecting when really she'd believed in me all along. Henry stepped forward, his voice carrying across the courtyard with alpha command. 3 weeks ago, the curse that has plagued our realm for 3 centuries was broken. Not by force. Not by sacrifice. But by love and the courage of one Omega who refused to believe she was worthless. He turned to me, his amber eyes blazing with pride. Sandra Whisper came to this fortress in chains, believing she was meant to die. Instead, she saved us all. The Hollow fed on Omega life force for centuries, but it couldn't consume what she was. An empty vessel born not to create life, but to purify death itself. She is the Hollow Breaker. My true mate. And your queen. The crowd erupted. Not in polite applause, but in chanting that shook the stones beneath our feet. Sandra Hollowbreaker. Queen of Nightclaw. The empty vessel who saved the realm. Henry placed a crown on my head, silver woven with night flowers that glowed like captured moonlight. Then he stepped back, giving me the floor. I looked out at the sea of faces and felt the weight of every Omega who'd stood where I stood, who died so others could live. Their spirits moved through the crowd like whispers of wind, blessing this moment. I was called Barren at 16, I said, my voice steady and clear. I was told I was worthless. That my life had no purpose because I couldn't bear children. I believed those lies for years. Silence fell across the courtyard. But I learned that worth is not defined by what we create, but by what we protect and who we choose to become. Every Omega who was sacrificed before me gave their lives to protect this realm. Elena, who loved gardening. Marcus, who wrote poetry. Lyra, who sang. We will honor them forever, and we will ensure that never again will any Omega be treated as less than what they are, sacred and essential. The chanting began again, louder this time, filled with hope and promise. Henry took my hand, our mate bond marks glowing silver blue in the sunlight. She is my queen, my mate, and the realm's salvation. I looked out at thousands of faces, at Sarah weeping with joy, at the night flowers blooming impossible in daylight, at Henry standing beside me with centuries of grief finally lifted from his shoulders. And I felt for the first time in my life exactly right. Not broken. Not worthless. But whole, powerful and loved. The empty vessel who had saved the realm. Queen Sandra Nightclaw, the Hollowbreaker, who proved that sometimes what the world calls weakness is actually the strength that saves everyone.